afternoon. Welcome. Hello. It's another warm, happy summer's afternoon here in Scotland, and I'd love to find out about what it's like where you are for our wonderful gathering today as we talk family history. We have a great Q&A. I see Patricia already. Hello from Cyprus. That's fantastic. Cyprus is definitely probably going to be a little bit warmer than it is here in Scotland, but yes. So today we have Ellie in the comments, and we're going to be talking, as we do every month, about your family history, questions, problems, everything else. I see that it's already a very sunny Southport, Oxford as well. That's brilliant to see. I'm going to turn a little bit more light on as well so we can see everything. But, I see it's not so great in Massachusetts, but, well, we can't have it everywhere brilliant. So hopefully, you're suffering for the rest of us, and next time you'll get the sun instead. Rosie's from Shropshire. Heather from Edinburgh. Welcome, Heather. Nice to see you all coming in. I see some people there, 26. The number's rising very quickly. So, yes. I'm here to basically answer all of the questions you might have. If you have any family history questions that you haven't got in already, then you can drop them in the comments, ask anything that you can think of. And if you have asked a question already, I have those in front of me, so I'll answer as many of those as I can too. And hopefully we'll get in the hour to as many as we can, and we'll talk about everything we possibly can to do with family history. So definitely get involved, definitely throw things in. I see Tess is here, Linda, I see lots of names I recognize, Andrew, Daphne, and more. Brilliant stuff. So it's all coming together. And so as well as you all getting in, I think there's enough of you to get started. We've had a great week at Findmypast. We're planning some very big, great record collections, and you'll hear more about those very soon. I know maybe a couple of you might know a little more than others, but it's all going to be revealed in due time, and I'll see you on Friday to talk about that particularly. But let's get to some of these questions. Anything that you can ask, anything you can think of. There are no silly questions at all. Come and ask anything you can possibly use to get yourself further with your family history. Some of the questions that we've had from before, I'm going to take a look at. So one of the questions we've got here is by Jane Richards. She says, was it common for someone to just change their surname? Her great-grandmother Brownlow had 4 girls. Only the eldest had the father named on the birth certificate. She believes her husband Ernest deserted her just after birth. The first, second, and fourth certificate have the surname Brownlow. The third has Kench. The second youngest were raised by a John Brownlow. She can't find any records except the 1939 register. Could Kench have just changed his surname? It's possible that names can change. The problem with changing surnames is that depol is the way to do it. You can do that officially, and you can register it, and it might be in the Gazette. So we do have record of official changes of surname. You'll find those in the London Gazette, Edinburgh Gazette, etc. However, it wasn't a requirement when you had to change your surname. So people could just go by another name, and there was nothing really stopping them. So if a name changed, and it's quite hard to tell, and there's no real official document you might find unless you're very lucky. So there's a plausibility that could happen, but also take a look at exactly where your family was, who was there, and make sure if there's no marriage and you're looking at the workhouse, places like that, then there may be perhaps some other record that you can find that could prove that perhaps the father wasn't around, and maybe it was a different father for this particular child or anything like that. There's all kinds of different ways to look at this. So I would try and rule everything out. No matter how strange or outrageous it might sound, put it all down and just cut through each until you've got only the truth left, which is what Sherlock Holmes said, isn't it? And he's possibly the best genealogist that we'll ever meet, although I don't think he ever turned his hand to genealogy. I see another question here we've got from previously submitted. Lee has asked about his second time's great-grandfather, John Cox Burt, in Lambeth Workhouse, 1842. He's got a copy of his birth certificate, and he found his baptism in a collection of London births and baptisms at St Mary's in Lambeth. But where can he find any workhouse records to find more information about the mother and father? I believe that Lambeth records are London Metropolitan Archives. A lot of workhouse records because they were part of the poor law system and they were mostly government controlled, you'll find a lot of those records at local archives, and even some of the private ones have deposited their records at those local archives. So I would start there. They're not one of the collections that has been massively digitized. You'll find some online, but not all of them. Definitely take a look. There are also a few microfilm around for these different records because they were very, very substantive, large collections. So a lot of them are microfilmed, and the original records sometimes even have been destroyed, but at least there's copies somehow that you can take a look at. So I would start with London Metropolitan Archive. That was where I'd look at first, and maybe go into their catalogue and see what they have. I believe my geography of London's all right, so I think we would think Lambeth is metropolitan, but definitely take a look at those London archives and see what you can find as well. And let's see what we've got here. So there's some more as well. Just get all these advanced questions done very quickly. And of course, always, if you miss a session or you ask a question in advance and you can't get to the live session, you can always watch these back as well. So don't worry too much if you are worried about asking those questions early. So we've got a question. Daphne said, where can you find war diaries on Findmypast? And did older campaigns keep war diaries? So war diaries really began at about 1914. You'll find that the war diaries that you might recognize and know as war diaries, but there are lots and lots of regimental histories and documents like that that give you pretty much the same kind of detail. So I would definitely look for those. If you know which regiment your ancestor was in, if it's the 90th Foot or whatever it became afterwards and all this thing, there's regimental museums. There are lots of old books, particularly created in the Victorian era, that describe all of the acts and all of the deeds of daring do and every conflict and campaign that these regiments fought in, particularly if they were a more illustrious one. All of that detail can be found in these kinds of books, and they are numerous. So take a look. We've got some of those on Findmypast. A lot of them are at the National Archives, which at the moment, I believe, is still free because of coronavirus. I don't know if that will stay that way. So if you do want to look at a unit diary, now is the time to go and get hold of it. Definitely go to the National Archives Discovery Catalogue and take a look, and you might find a bit more. It's always very useful because once you know the battalion and all the details of your war-going ancestor, to find out exactly where they were, exactly on a map, and knowing even maybe if they lost their lives, you'll know exactly what caused that. Sometimes they'll be mentioned by name, often they won't, but you'll know. When we said we lost 3 people that day, which I did for my great uncle, I saw that he died on a day where they were camped at a farm and there was some enemy shelling at that point, and they said 3 people died that day, and so he must have died as a result of a shell. And so these kind of things, I now know a bit more about that using those diaries. So definitely get in there quickly and get those while they're free. I think we have just one more question for the advance, and then we'll go into all of the other ones that you're asking now. So keep submitting them now and we'll get to them. So the advance question was involves someone's great uncle, Douglas Guy from Sally. He was born in 1884 in Portsmouth. He left the Fremantle via a ship called the Bouleau, which left from Antwerp in January 1907. He arrived in Australia and lived in Kalgoorlie in 1909. He's documented on electoral roles as a cycle maker, living in the Federal Hotel. Then his trail goes cold. I'd like to know what happened to him, where he lived, where he worked, and where he died. How can I find out? So it sounds like if he's living in a hotel and he's got a job like cycle maker, it sounds maybe he's working with his hands, he's doing manual work, he's not doing something that he's created a big trade for and he has to do a specific thing. He could probably have turned his hand to anything. And he said if he's staying in a hotel, then there's nothing to say that he's put down roots in this particular place. I would start exploring further afield and see what happens. Douglas Guy is one of those names that it's not massively common, but it's not hugely rare. So we're kind of in the middle with this. I would really broaden it. It looks like you've got a bit of information about his age. You should be able to do pretty well with that and start exploring. With Fremantle, there are some great passenger lists, and particularly maybe some more coming very shortly that might help to give you a bit more information. But don't forget that in Australia, many people went around the coast rather than travel inland because it was such a large and inhospitable climate to travel from one side to the other. So our new collection of inward, outward and coastal passenger lists might be really useful because it's got those coastal lists too, to cover those people that go around the outside of Australia to move to different places. And people definitely did. At this kind of point, there were lots of opportunities for people at all kinds of different corners of Australia. So don't keep your search in a narrow place, broaden it and see what happens. You've got enough information, hopefully, to be certain and rule in or out when you look at a particular individual, if that's the person you're looking for. So I think that's what I'd do. I'd start much broader and see if we can find any Douglas guys in Australia and see what they're doing. I wouldn't even rule out New Zealand as well, just in case, see if you went further afield still, although that would be a much smaller chance. So I'm seeing all of your questions as well. See, Chris has asked a good addition to that. It's always worth searching on Trove if you haven't already. Good collection of Australian newspapers, just like our British newspaper archive, full of detail, and that's really useful to look at as well. So Sue is saying she used Scotland's People last week. If only Irish records were available and so informative. There are lots and lots of Scottish records all over the country, put in different archives, repositories, lots and lots of detail. And those records, some are on Scotland's People, some are on Findmypast, some are still in archives. And hopefully it's going to get much easier over the coming months, as well as the massive collection that's already out there. So Scotland is a lot better than it was, but it's going to get better still. And for Ireland, I say don't give up too much as well, because there are lots of Irish records always coming online too. You just have to be a bit more lateral when it comes to Irish records. It's not so much the same way of thinking as Scotland or Wales or England. You have to take a different approach, and that's something that takes a bit of getting used to. So there are some really good webinars, really good presentations, some that we've done here at Findmypast as well, that can give you a good grounding in Irish genealogy. I really recommend using those and taking a look and seeing what you can get, because I'm doing some Irish research at the moment and it's definitely very different. It's definitely something that takes a different set of eyes. And don't be afraid always as well to find yourself a bit of a research partner, a second set of eyes, and look at what you're doing and see what they think about different things. And I know I do that sometimes with Jem Baldwin, you might know on here quite often. We'll look at each other's work sometimes, and I've found it really useful sometimes just to talk things out and see what comes out. And sometimes it's been something that's found out on its own. So a good thing to start. And let's see. So Mandy has found a baptism baby born, freeborn next to his name. Would this mean his father would have been a slave in Hull, Yorkshire? I'm not sure what period this might be. There are a number of very interesting names throughout history. Freeborn sounds like it may even have been a Puritan name. It could have been a name that's just been used as a Christian name, as a first name, forename. So it's not something that I would look at exactly, and I would look at your year of when this baptism is to see for certain, because of course if it was a point when slavery had been outlawed, then this probably not looking at that kind of record. So an interesting question, but I would first of all look at the name, and I would also see if you've got that first name and you find them in other records, if they have that name, because it's very unique, you might be able to find it, or not. But I wouldn't assume, first of all, that they were slaves, especially particularly in the UK, because there weren't so many here in Britain itself. Mostly they were in the Caribbean and the colonies. But don't rule it out. Definitely, it's a very dim possibility, but start with the most obvious always and work backwards and see what goes on from there. Okay, so I see Sally asked, I'd say I got to your question just before, Sally, so I hope that answer was useful for you. I see everyone else. I see Linda saying ciao. I'm trying to keep my Italian roots as quiet as possible this week, just to not cause any offence. So I shall not be speaking any Italian or doing anything like that this week at least. And then maybe in a few weeks, I'll go back to wishing you all good luck in Bocca al Lupo, as I do often. So let's see, we've got here some more. Andrew has made a comment relating to that name change thing we talked about a little bit earlier. He's got a Rawson, whose birth and baptism were Stafford. Father used these names interchangeably, but he was actually a Smith. And that really illustrates, it shows that this name changing happens a lot. So just keep your eyes peeled and look at every other part of a record when you're trying to rule in or out different bits of document. It's something like an occupation, an age, marital status, something interesting like witnesses in a wedding. All of these things might be really useful for giving you that final clue so you know if you've got the right person. So don't forget anything in that sense, and try and keep it all recorded. I like to use Excel a little bit as well. When I look at a person, I make like a person's profile in Excel, and I write down every record and a link to each record that I found, and then try and make sense of them and make sure which ones I'm definite, which ones maybe, and which ones I've definitely ruled out until I've ruled them all around, and I can see hopefully a nice consistent logical pattern which makes sense a lot more. Jane said, could I point you in the right direction to find relatives in America? That would depend on what period you're looking at. The first thing, if you're looking at going from Britain to America, start with passenger lists. We've got a great collection of passenger lists arriving in the United States. And always when it comes to things like passenger lists, the country involved is usually much more interested in people arriving than people leaving. So when you have these people arrive in the United States, particularly after around about 1902, I think, the documents get really detailed. And they're quite detailed before that, but then you get lots of information such as who are you visiting, what address are you going to, what do you intend to do when you get there. All these different elements are really useful to know we've got the right person, and maybe to establish them on the other side with the wonderful census collection that exists in the United States. They haven't got the 1890 census. That went the same way as our England and Wales 1931 census. It was unfortunately lost in a fire, but we have censuses all the way up to 1940, which is really useful for getting closer to those modern cousins and modern relatives, working backwards like you do with other censuses every 10 years, just like the same way you'd use British censuses. Really helpful, really useful. A lot of records are stored by state, which is very different from here, where we might have countrywide records. So once you find out which state your ancestor or relative might be in, then start looking at those state collections a lot more. State archives, even county archives. In different counties in the United States, you have different things. I'm currently looking at some of my American cousins, and they're in New Jersey. And I know that the particular county they're in has a great collection of online naturalizations. And those naturalizations even have photographs as well. Passport applications, naturalizations, a lot of these things have photographs of the people involved. And that's really useful to find. If you've got a fourth or fifth cousin, perhaps, who traveled to the United States, this might be how you get that image of them to put on your family tree. So those records are really useful too. But in terms of records, the same kind of technique is very useful. If you're used to British research, start with that kind of idea. You want to get birth, marriage, and death records. You want to use censuses. Those are the things that can really start to build out the names and dates. And hopefully, perhaps, of course, if you build a tree as well, you might find a cousin that you can connect to. But then, of course, using records, always do that as well. And there are plenty of records, particularly on Findmypast, to help you along the way. But in terms of America as well, don't be afraid of looking at those state collections and the state archive websites or anything like that too. Let's see what we have here. So Jane has said that she now knows that her husband Ernest joined the Royal Welsh Fusiliers the February after his first daughter was born. He was abroad until 1905, so not the father of the others. Can't find the divorce, but he remarried in 1907. Now, it seems that, and so this is a follow-up from Jane, so it was our earlier question, that divorce was far less used at this kind of point. It was much harder to come by to get a divorce. You are more likely, it's a statistic I remember from the 1939 register, to be a butler than a divorcee in 1939 in the country. And there weren't that many butlers in that kind of point in the mid-20th century. So it's very difficult and very expensive to get a divorce. Most people, particularly if they were working class, may have just moved to another place and just remarried without any issue or confusion, because not many people would know them and there was no real database to check. So you might never find a divorce record. There are indexes. There are indexes you can find that might give you more detail. As you get towards the modern era, there's very little detail because divorce proceedings can be quite gruesome and graphic. So they tend to leave that out completely. You'll just have the details that someone's divorced. Early ones are full of detail and you can read the whole comings and goings of any kind of divorce proceedings. But don't be worried if you don't find a divorce record in particular, because of course they may not have done that. So that's something that does happen. The bigamist in your family tree may be lurking around, and there are more than you may think. So it's not something to be too terrified of when you find it may have happened. Let's see who we've got here. I see Matthew saying hello. Hi there. I see all these questions coming through. Fantastic. See everything. Anya has an ancestor board in St. Kitts. So those new records will hopefully... Oh, she's not in your new record. I spoke too soon. Her father recorded on a death certificate as a soldier. I'm assuming his regiment were in St. Kitts for him to be born there. How would I find what regiment he was in to try and work out more? So there's a collection of armed forces births and baptisms that you might want to look at. They will be separate from the local church quite often. So if you look in there, you may find your military ancestors' children being born. They often had their own bishoprics, the bishopric of the forces. And I know my own grandparents, their records are in these collections. And I think the bishopric was Malta, Cyrenaica, Tripolitana, and Cyprus, I think. So the very large, very broad bishoprics, dioceses, and in there you'll find the records for all of those soldiers that were on those particular campaigns or serving in that particular area. So that would be where I would look, and that would be one place to look. And you should also look at our service records. If it's St. Kitts, I imagine he's a relatively early soldier, and so that would be helpful. You might find 2 or 3 people with the same name, and then do as we've talked about lots of times, lay each person with that name out and rule in or out by looking. Often in those service records, you'll find next of kin. Those next of kin details will tell you straight away if you've got the right person, because it will mention if they married or if they had children while they were serving, hopefully. So that's a great marker to give you an idea. You could also take a look at some histories online of places like St. Kitts to tell you which regiments were stationed there at which times, and that might be a great marker as well, because a place that size, I would imagine there's probably only 1 or 2, and so that could be really, really helpful. So start with those, and that will hopefully help you a lot. So Anya, fingers crossed with that. Let's see, we have here. Got here a question from Jimmy. My surname is Oxton. My grandfather was born in Liverpool in 1914. We always thought our Oxton branch of our family tree originated from Oxton village near Bebington, not far from Liverpool. After my dad, his brother, and his male paternal first cousin all got DNA tests back with 0 English and Welsh DNA, only Irish and Scottish. I'm not sure anymore. Any resources you can suggest to help someone figure out the origination of their surname? So this is one of those big things that comes up a little bit, and I've seen this a few times. And when you have your DNA test and you get that pie chart and it tells you you're 12% this or that, it often will change. It will adapt over time. They're comparing you to lots and lots of people in the database, and they're trying to work out who you look most like. But there are lots and lots of people that move around, and there are also lots and lots of people that have billions of little pieces of DNA, and all of that DNA, when you compare, you have to see what all these people have in common. So if you have maybe 10 people that you're comparing to who are from Czechia, for example, then in those 10 people, perhaps they all have brown eyes, and you look at a piece of DNA and go, right, that's the DNA that must mean these people are Czech. And it actually just is the piece of DNA that shows they've all got brown eyes or something like that. It's some part. And over time, this will change, it will adapt, it will move along. And the bigger this pool, the more you can see, hang on, they've got this piece in common, not this piece. And you can see this, and you can compare more accurately. And you can look at those little strands and say, this is the bit they've got. So these estimations change all the time as they work out that different things are related to different populations. Different markers are all important to different areas of the world. So don't take your percentages too seriously. Scotland and Ireland are very, very close to Liverpool and around this area. Lots of people who live in Liverpool have Irish connections, so perhaps there's some confusion there with people who now live in that sort of area, and they came from Ireland originally and this sort of thing. So don't worry too much. The only way to really be sure about where your surname is from is to start looking at records and follow it backwards and go from there. It doesn't mean with these pie charts and percentages that you've got anything to worry about or anything like that. And perhaps even in a month or two, you'll get an email and find out that they've adjusted the percentages and you actually are 10% this or 20% that. So don't worry too much. It will all come right in the end. And it's one of those exciting things to try and find out. So you're probably quite right that your surname may come from that particular village, but it could also have changed from something else. It could be a derivation of Oxted or something else that we could imagine. So only by following it backwards will you know the truth. So you've got a really nice, plausible way that it might have come about, but let's get some records and work backwards, and hopefully we'll get there. So DNA is a really useful tool, particularly useful for proving you're on the right track, but don't worry with those pie charts. I have been, what have I been? Serbian for a little while, which was interesting. I've been Albanian. All these things for a little while I've had in my percentages, and then over time it disappears and it becomes something else. I think at the moment I'm only 2% Italian, I think, and I'm mostly German, which is something that's new and that's happened recently. So I'm assuming, of course, that that's going to change again at some point. So don't worry too much and just let it all come out in the wash. So let's see what else we have as we go through. I see there Sally's saying there, thank you very much. She's got postcards and photographs. That's great. And if you've got other family members who've traveled to a certain place as well, always check where those family members are, because it's quite often if someone's not doing so well in one place, they might move to where the other family members are and maybe rely on their support, or maybe they could have got them a job or something like that. So definitely those are really useful as well. Patricia asks, are there any South African records in the early 1900s? There are South African records. There are quite a few. The main problem with South African records is a lot of them are not that detailed. If you look at, say, a death record in South Africa, it really just gives you the information that you search for. It doesn't give you that much extra, even when you have the original in front of you. So it's a little harder to do South African research, I think. But there are wills, there are other records, other documents. A lot of them, I think, are on the National South African Archives. I think they have their own website, which lets you search through. That would be where I would look. And then, of course, there are a number online as well, but not so many for South Africa. It's still one of those ones where a lot of them are in paper. Linda's asked, would any Edinburgh 1917 marriages would be anywhere other than Scotland's people? Well, they might be on Findmypast, and there are many more of those records coming along. But for the modern era, post 1855, you probably first port of call would be Scotland's people, just for now at least. I would also take a look at our wonderful newspaper collection, because these marriage notices occur a lot, and sometimes you'll even get a photograph. You might get some details of things that were given as wedding gifts. All those things are really useful and important, and they could be in there too. So in terms of marriage records, the official marriage, yes, go to Scotland's people, but outside of that, there are other records that might be useful, and I will go straight to newspapers to help with that. And let's see what else we've got. Dawn has said, any records for training ships, the one named Southampton in Hull that her grandfather was sent to? For that, I would look at actual service records. Those usually are listed as a ship, and so you'll see when you look, and it's a good reason, and it's a good example about why you should explore all of the bits of information that you find in service records. Our naval service records, for example, will tell you that someone was serving on, say, HMS Southampton, and unless you knew that that was a training ship and that was somewhere that was moored up and wasn't going out anywhere, you might think they were traveling the world or something. So definitely take a look at any details of any ship used, even if you've got just commercial passenger list. Find out about that ship. You might get a photograph of the ship. Find out a bit more about the detail involved, particularly, again, for soldiers, that you want to know their division, their regiment. Look at those diaries, as we spoke about. If they're in the Navy, you want to know about the ships, and you want to know what those ships did, and that will really help you. So start with those original service records, and that would be where I would look for that. Linda's said, yes, it's very great to have a second pair of eyes you trust to look things over. It's really, really important. So definitely do that. And we've got a wonderful forum, the Findmypast forum, to help you with that as well. So do ask questions there. I've done it myself. I know many of you have. It's a really, really useful tool, and it's really helpful. And don't be afraid to ask for help as well. I know, I think Chris is here in the comments somewhere. I did think I saw her say hello, Chris Lang, who very happily went to try and fulfill a little bit of a genealogy request for me in Darlaston, where I found my great-great-grandfather's gravestone in a particular cemetery, James Bridge Cemetery in Darlaston. Unfortunately, it looks like it's not there, which is a shame, but at least I know that I've seen patch of ground where he was, and it's quite nice. And that was a little bit of teamwork there as well. She was very, very thorough and very clever in working out that we had the right spot, and that we had a little bit of luck as well too, looking at the original burial registers and finding a name that happened to be on the same page that was in the grave next door. So really, really happy with asking for help there. And of course, I live a good few hundred miles away, and that wouldn't have been something I would have been able to get to anytime soon. And so it was really good to be able to see something that connected me a little bit more with my family. See what else we've got. I see more questions. I see other people saying that they're here and they've joined. That's all. You've got half an hour to go, and we still got plenty of time for questions. Audrey's made a mention about these unit diaries. Even when they aren't for anymore, they're still really good value. That's a really good point. There's a flat fee of £3.50 per download, and lots of those files are huge. They do cover a lot of information, so they are still worth it. So definitely have a look. And I see Jamie has said as well, she had lots of success, found amazing information, do surname searches in newspapers.com using the state and surrounding states when those ancestors lived in America. That's, yes, an American resource there. Lots and lots of newspapers all around the world are useful. So if there's a particular national research like Trove in Australia or anything like that, then definitely take a look at those too. And there we go. So Helene has said Conan Doyle may have been interested in genealogy, but his own creation isn't a real life person. Obviously the character would have been familiar with them, being from a highly placed family. Yes, Sherlock Holmes isn't real, but I think we all have a bit of his spirit in us. So yes, Sherlock Holmes is definitely one of those great characters we can all look to as we investigate and sleuth our way through the records that we're looking for. And another comment we say about here, freeborn is also a surname. Surname is also used as forenames as well, especially in northern counties. That was for the earlier question about having freeborn as a name. Again, it depends entirely on the year that you have that. Here we go. Valerie has 2 different sets of records for 2 different couples who could be their great-great-grandparents. They sent for the marriage certificate for one couple, so they have their addresses in Spitalfields. Where can I trace back that address to get more information to see if it matches what I know about them? So our census address search on Findmypast, it would depend which decade we're looking at. I think with great-great-grandparents, I'm hoping we're still in that census period, 1841 to 1911, soon to be 1921. If so, you can search by address using that, and you go to the top of the page on Findmypast and you click on that search, and then in that drop down you'll see address search for censuses, and you click on that and put in the details of where that address is and see if you can find that particular family. So that's what I would do, and that would be a great help. I think often I've looked at the same address census later and I can't find someone, and I found them perhaps mistranscribed, something like that. Very, very interesting, very different. And so that's one thing I do. But also if I have an address, perhaps like you say, for a marriage, something, I will go and have a look at the previous and the next census along and see who's there, and see perhaps if I can find that family there, if I can't find them from normal census search. And it will give you that household and the family, and hopefully give you those clues. So let's see what we have here as we go through. Let's get some more. So Joan is listening in from near Seattle. That's a lovely place, lovely part of the world. Months in beautiful San Carlos, Mexico. She's grateful for the broadcast, always picking up nuggets information. Thank you for appreciating us. It's good. And hi to the Findmypast team. So there's Ellie as well. I'm sure she'll be very appreciative too. And I'll pass that on to everyone else as well. And yes, we've got a few. So Valerie's made a good point. They're Irish working in England for some years. There were lots, particularly around Liverpool. Lots and lots of urban centres have very high Irish populations. Dundee in Scotland has quite a large one. Very, very important to get used to Irish research if you're doing British research, because eventually you'll find some Irish relatives. It might be quite some far back, but you know, if you haven't found Irish ancestors yet, keep looking, because I've got a feeling you'll find one eventually. Whether it's north or south, they are everywhere, and they get into our family tree at a rate of knots. So definitely you'll find someone, as I still am hunting my elusive Irish ancestors myself. And see what we have here. See, we've got some more. Sylvia's chap moved to Japan for a bigamous marriage, and when he returned to the UK in 1905, his English wife was still alive. That must have made for some awkward conversations. You have to tell us if he went back to the same place, because that would be a little more awkward than living somewhere else. And I see lots of people saying they had bigamist ancestors, and Rosie can't wait to see about her bigamist ancestor on the 1921 census and who he was with. It's very interesting. I don't think I've found one yet, but I'm sure there'll be them. And so I see a question here from C. Davis. They need some help for searching. They want to find a business in the 1960s. I would say for this, I mean, looking for a business is slightly harder. You'd start, I think, with newspapers, because newspapers, you don't really need to look for a person, and you might find some details there. There are records of businesses on places like Companies House, which are online. You can search those for free. I'm not sure how early that goes. I don't think they register businesses all the way back that far, but it depends how long it stayed in operation. But start with newspapers, and we have plenty of newspapers that cover the 1960s, and that might give you a start and might talk about the particular business that you're looking for, perhaps opening, closing, maybe someone performing there. If it's a club, you might find lots of adverts about different performers, artists, etc. So that'd be where I would start, I think, and that would go from there. Let's see. And yes, I see in people talking about the weather, about it being quite warm. It's definitely north of Fife, so not far away from me. And you've moved rooms. I have a little temperature meter right in front of me, and I'm noticing it slowly creep up as I have the light on and the windows closed to stop the alarms and sirens going off around me. So you may notice that I get shinier and shinier as we go on. But I think we're at 27.4 Celsius right now, and going 27.5. We're going up. So let's see if we can get to the hour before I pass out. And that's what we have here. So Matthew's got a comment here. He says, my great-grandmother, Mary Ann Gray, was born in London in the 1870s. My nan always told my mum and I that the Greys related to the Greys of Scotland. We so far found no evidence or suggestion of a Scottish link. Mary's father, William Thomas Gray, was born in 1840 in Lambeth. His father was probably John Gray, who, according to the 1841 census, was not born in Surrey. John died before 1851. Could he have been from Scotland, or could the link be further back? London absorbs people a lot, all the way through history. People have been arriving in London from all kinds of places. It would really be very hard to say if your ancestor, when you look at 1841 census, was from, Surrey, Hampshire, as we go further backwards, so from Hampshire to Manchester to Glasgow. It would be much harder to pick that out. I would start with parish records and things like that, and get as much as you can about the generation that you do have. So all of their children, all of those baptisms at this kind of point, 1840 and around this time, should have a fair amount of detail inside. And hopefully maybe you might find the marriage of those parents as well. And that could be really useful, because that might give you some detail about where they're from, or some detail about things like witnesses and other family members. This also is really helpful. At this point as well, I would also say something in Scotland might be arriving very soon that might help you quite a bit. So watch this space when it comes to looking at the Greys on that side. But I would start by preparing for that by doing some research in your Lambeth area, by looking at records that are already around and online, or looking at different kind of parish registers, because that's where you're going to find the little bits of information that you might have discounted the first time or glossed over that might help. So look to those siblings, see if there are any different bits of information, all these different baptisms, look for the marriage, and hopefully you get that bit of information ready. So at least if you still are unsure, if it doesn't tell you exactly, then you've got more information to line up. You might then know the father's name and father's occupation. You might know something else. You might know some extra middle names, and maybe one of those might be more of a common family name or something. So keep all of those around, and they might help you when you look at Scottish records in particular, perhaps in this large new release that's coming. Or you may also just get the answer straight when you're looking at the records in Lambeth itself. Are there any records regarding Church of England vicars, where they were trained and became a vicar? I believe there are. I was looking at this recently. I definitely have seen in newspapers lots and lots of detail about various different vicars who are going about their business. That's a useful place to look. Fates and galas and things, they usually mention, so that can be useful. I think if you look at places like the vicarages they may be living at, sometimes if you Google those, you might find a bit of detail. And local parishes often have a bit of information about different previous incumbents, vicars and people like that. The Church of England themselves, I think, don't have anything too digital, but I believe there's a database of clergy of the Church of England, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm sure someone is going to, there we go. So Chris has already posted it, this clergy Church of England database. So that would be very, very useful. So take a look at that, and that will be where to look. And then, of course, there are, yes, definitely some directories as well. Andrew says Crockford's is a good one. Other directories too, postal directories, trade directories, very, very helpful. And those as well. So it's great. And as ever, newspapers, a fascinating source, easy to get distracted, which is very, very true. I'm seeing lots and lots of comments coming through. Records for trainee bakers and confectioners. Directories again, trade directories, postal directories, start with those. It's not really something that you really have to do any kind of guild apprenticeship for or something, unless maybe you might find a record if they trained amongst one of the best or something, perhaps a fine chef, but I would assume not. I would start looking at those directories and start looking at things like that, and that will be where I might find something. That will be the starting point that I would go to. Let's see what else we've got here. We've got some more. So we've got here one. Would someone who was a school teacher master have trained as an apprentice in Scotland in the early 1800s? If so, where would one look? If you are training to be a teacher, you can train anywhere. I have a number of aunts that have trained in Scotland and have taught in Canterbury, in York, in other places, Lincoln, I believe, as well. They just go where there's work sometimes if they happen to be a school teacher. My own great-grandfather was a school teacher from Wales and ended up in Staffordshire. And so I believe it's fairly easy for people to move around in that sense because there are plenty of schools and plenty of need for them. So they may well have. Start with the information you've got on censuses and detail, find out the place of birth from censuses, and then when you know their place of birth, try and work out in between the censuses when they may have moved and look at their occupations on these censuses to see, because often if they're training, they will say if they're, apprentice teacher, trainee teacher, these sort of things, and that might give you a bit of an idea if they're at a particular training college or training school. There's a big training school in Glasgow. I know that, and that's where my great aunt trained in the early 1900s, about 1907. But there are other places as well they may have learned, and so take a look there as well. So start with the censuses, start with the records that are easy to get hold of, and then when you know an area, you might be able to then go into more detail and take a look at those technical colleges and training areas, and to see where you might be able to find some detail of them learning their trade and seeing how we go on. Hazel has broken a brick wall by reading a bit about the Napoleonic Wars. Sheila Simonson mentions in a paper, following the drum, British women in the Peninsular War, when a woman's soldier or husband died, the odds were good she'd remarry within the week. If a woman couldn't remarry, or if a job could not be found for her within the regiment, her rations would be immediately stopped and she and the children would be sent back to England without further support. This is a thing that really highlights how much we need to look at the context of all this stuff. We need to explore the detail, and we need to understand the life that our ancestors lived by looking at the history of the areas around them, the occupations they did, and the places they lived. So can't echo that enough. If you can find a book, even if it's something just very referencey, a gazetteer that might describe the town or village that they're in, anything is useful to give you that context and give you some understanding. So definitely regimental histories, local area histories, social histories, detail about different things that can help to give you that story. One of those things, and I said I won't talk very much about Italy, I promise, but a lot of migration from Italy to other countries up to a certain point was from the north, and then suddenly it was from the south, and it changed almost overnight. And it was one of those things that was very, very hard to understand why for a long time. I don't think anyone had really put two and two together, or at least no one that I'd seen or read. And then there was one particular author that I was reading that was very astute and noticed that the moment that this railway had been finished that linked the south of Italy from the very base all the way up to all the ports in the north, then suddenly everyone was getting on this train and going to the ports in the north from the south and then leaving in the same way. So that's why it was the fact that it suddenly became much cheaper and much easier to travel from the south. And so these people then were much more able to do it. And that was the thing that changed. So these are the things that when you read enough local history, social history, you understand all these different elements. This was a book on Italian transport and railway history. So really that was a thrilling read that I put by my bed for quite some time because it always helped me sleep. It's all worth it. Have a go, particularly some of those older books that might not look so perfect at first. Have a go and see what you can find. And Diana's asking, can you find anything for land girls during World War II? I think the National Archives have some detail about land girls. I don't believe too much is open because of the fact that it's quite recent, but I would look there because they definitely have some detail of the Home Guard, and I'm sure I've seen some detail of land girls too. When I was doing some research there for my master's degree, I know I looked at some World War II records of certain different divisions and different sort of elements of British armed forces that weren't the proper army. So definitely take a look there and you might find some stuff. And it's a great catalogue anyway. Look for everything in there. You'll definitely, hopefully find something about your ancestor. So make yourself really, really familiar with these online catalogues of everywhere you can think of. Any archive, any library, anything like that, you can definitely take a look at. You can definitely get a hold of things and you might find stuff. The National Library of Wales, I type in the parish and the surname of what I'm looking for, and the village is so small, I always find 3 or 4 names. Some of them, of course, definitely, I think probably my ancestor because it's the only family with that surname in the village. All those things are really useful and it gets me big wills, things I need. Go to all these catalogues and take a look. Not all of it is online. Some of it is just in paper form. You might have to order. You might have to ask a friendly archivist. And all archivists are very friendly, of course. And they are usually only too happy to help because they're as excited about this kind of thing as we are, perhaps even more so, if you could imagine such a thing. So definitely ask and see what you can do and what you can find. Another bit of extra tip from Audrey Collins: if you can find a Church of England clergyman in Crockford's, it will often detail their university education, usually Oxbridge, which you can then follow up in printed university alumni registers, and sometimes the registers of individual colleges, which in turn often gives details of the public school they attended, which may also have printed alumni registers, etc., etc. It is a chain. If you can keep following along all of these different records, you'll get to the next one, and hopefully build that wonderful story. So it's really, really exciting too. And Victoria has a good suggestion here about land girls that different county archives might have details too. So she suggests Suffolk archives for Suffolk land girls, but yes, definitely local archives, national archives, anything that holds paper records, go and have a look. I've even had some great luck with university archives, which people forget about, but they can often have a lot of local records. Dundee University Archive has whole records of religions in there and some really interesting sets of documents that can be useful. John has asked a good question. Are there missing pages for the 1861 Wales census in Breckenshire? He can't find the sister, his second great-grandfather and her family. So if you go to our all record sets section on Findmypast, so you go to search and you drop down and it says all record sets, click on that. Or if you're in any search, it should be in the top corner, it says all record sets. Go there and look for the 1861 census or any census, and you'll see a search page, and that's got all of your unique search fields that you can use to find more information. However, it also has on the lower, now I'm going to try and make this so this is the right side for you because I think this might be reversed, the lower right-hand side, I hope I'm on the right, there's a little set of links, a little bit of detail, and on there usually is a link that tells you missing elements. We usually have a connection to all these bits that we know are missing in different censuses. Sometimes there's also a bit of information below the search as well that tells you about these censuses, what you need to know, and it may be there as well. But those coverage lists and those details of missing records should be really useful and help you know if you're barking up the wrong family tree, let's say. And I would start with that. And if you're still not sure, do a search for the parish that you're looking at in that census and don't put a name in and see how many results you get. And if you get a lot of results, then you know that it's probably okay. If you don't get any, or you get a very, very small number, then maybe perhaps something's wrong with this particular parish, and maybe these records may not have survived. It's relatively comprehensive. However, there's always a few perhaps that have escaped. And when we talk about those that have escaped, they're always ours, aren't they? It's one of those things. Can I recommend any good books or resources for medieval genealogy? That's a tough one. The National Archives have some really good little guides on their website, and they're online, so that's a good one to look at. But also, there's a great set of books that I really like. The Time Traveller's Guide. I think they've got one to medieval England. I think they've got Elizabethan, and they have another one as well, which I think it might be Restoration. I think that's the one, and they might have just released a Georgian one. But these records, these Time Traveller's Guide, are written almost like a guidebook. And that guidebook is for someone today going to this place, and they tell you how society worked and how people lived and what they did. And I find them really not only interesting and quite easy to read, because I like travel. Imagine you're going to holiday, you're going to Spain or Sweden or anywhere else, you might read one of those guidebooks. It's just like that, but you imagine you're going back to the medieval era in England, or Tudor, Elizabethan England, or anything, and it tells you everything about how people lived, their culture, the jobs they might have done, the phrases they might have used, the places they might hang around, the things they did for fun, all that stuff in a really nice, easy to read way. So my bookshelf isn't in this room, or I would get it for you, but maybe perhaps next time I'll get one out and maybe show you a bit. Perhaps on Friday I might pull some out and maybe read an excerpt or something. But definitely those are books I would recommend, not only for medieval England, for some social and local history, but also for, I think they said there's Elizabethan version, there's a few more really, really good. And there are, again, those guides at the National Archives as well that are really helpful. And there are lots and lots of different and interesting records when it comes to medieval genealogy. If you have peasant ancestors, as we all do, it might be a little hard to find what you're looking for. However, by then, hopefully you found someone who's notable enough to appear in records of note. And those larger record collections that are notable are full of detail. So there's no risk of missing ancestors if they're prominent enough, and you'll be able to go back quite some way, which is what's exciting. If you can get through this hard gap of getting these parish registers back far enough and you can connect to someone who's illustrious, then from there, it's kind of a little bit easier, which is nice to think about. So we're all going through that very, very hard bit, and we'll get there. So yes, fingers crossed. And when you do, then tell us all about it. And Matthew said I was pointing to the right, so that's good. So I'm glad I've got my left and right ready. It's very hard when it's backwards, I can tell you. And see what we've got here. Some more. I like to see you all answering each other's questions as well. It's really good. Excellent stuff. Sue says they found the birth and death of a baby in the newspaper. The only place it was recorded. Might be worth a look. Very true. Sylvia said Oxford University sent her details for a Vice-Chancellor's court proceedings and the bailiff's list of seized goods sold at auction to pay the fine imposed on a former student. Wow. So yes, lots and lots of sources. If they've got records, you need to get in touch with them. That's the thing. I always try and make sure I've got something in the fire. And as I do that, then I know I've got something to wait for and something to possibly be excited by. I know I was looking for my great uncle's records and I found them by accident in a Portuguese archive. And I sent them an email thinking I would have to pay a lot of money for this record. I think it was his passport that they created for him in the 1950s, I believe, for traveling to Mozambique and a few places in Africa. And I found that, and I basically asked them, and within 3 days, they sent me an email with the record attached. Completely free. There it was. It was fantastic. I luckily had a Portuguese colleague that translated it for me, and they gave him that wonderful title of Minister for Edifices. He was an architect and he worked for the Foreign Office. So I don't know if he was the Minister for Edifices, which sounds very, very fantastic. I think maybe he was just an architect that worked on these things. But it was wonderful to see that and see. I don't know if it was a Portuguese term or perhaps something he was given, but great to see too. Let's see what we have here. I see Linda Licata is looking for someone in the United States. So I'm guessing he's come from Sicily. Licata is a wonderful part of the world. And Sicilian surnames we could talk a long time about. Let's see, we have, so Matthew's seen those time traveller books, looking at some answers from the 13th to 15th century. He's got them in Curia, Regis rolls and the plea rolls, but it's hard to read. Definitely hard to read. There is also, I think it's also the National Archives. They're getting a good showing today a set of paleography guides and a little bit of a paleography help course. I think the little online thing that you can do to get a bit better about that is difficult, particularly Latin. I find Latin as well in these records less so, but particularly in church records when you go to Latin, the people who are writing Latin aren't actually that good at Latin. So if you're very good at Latin, it's not a good thing because these people probably aren't. So they're not doing the things that you should do with the words or anything like that. So it makes it very, very confusing. So you'll find a strange mix of these different words together, and it's very, very hard to pull apart and things. But use Google Translate if you do find Latin in records. Again, it probably won't get you all the way there because Google won't understand why these people have used this word and not this word. Might give you the gist of something. And of course, yes, as we get later and later on, Latin stops being used. And of course, people were a little more educated in Latin rather than having a few weeks or months of education in it and then just sent out into the world to write everything they could. And that's when they use their own language base and they don't quite get it right. And so that's that. But definitely it's a start. If you're missing a word particular in something like Translate, look for that individual word itself and see what that could have been and see what might happen there. And so we've got, yes. So let's see, we have here. Karen contacted Hollywood Palace Gardens HR department. And they sent info on her great uncle who was head gardener there in the early 1900s. That's fantastic. I don't know if you've seen our royal and imperial calendars because they cover a lot of people who worked for the civil service and the royal household. And we also have royal household records as well. So I hope you've looked at those. They are really, really useful. And there, Chris, being helpful as ever. That's the paleography thing that I was thinking of. So it's great. And I throw these ideas out, and I'm glad there are so many helpful people around who can fill in my scatterbrained suggestions. So that's good. Anya has contacted a bank archive to find information on the great-grandfather's time working for TSB. They found out the date he started and his pay and also when he retired. I think I can see a Friday question coming. I want to know, and I think we'll think about this as a question of the week, where you have found the strangest place you found records and details about your family history and what you found. And that's going to be interesting. Don't answer now. Keep it secret. And we'll get to that, I think, on Friday, because I'll be seeing you again on Friday as well. And very interesting to see some of these things. So Audrey has posted again a link about the medieval and early modern guide I was talking of as well. That's great. And Daphne's saying she's always in awe of the knowledge that Findmypast presenters have. It trips off the tongue. It does, but yes, it's one of those things that definitely we feel the pressure, I think, and it depends what the questions are. Obviously this is genealogy. I know plenty about that, but don't ask me to change a plug or anything. And I think there's swings and roundabouts. I've been having a lot of help in my making my house look nice. That doesn't involve DIY or anything that might kill me. So I've been doing that too. Let's see what else we have. We have about a minute to go. So I'm going to see if I can pull out a question or two left. So we have a question from Talent on Board. Why would someone leave England in 1829 for Quebec? They had small children and were farmers. That's interesting. There are lots of different reasons. If you're a farmer, then you may have found the promise of cheap, large, new land. Very exciting. You've got the skills. You may have gone across. Also, at this point, a lot of old Napoleonic soldiers were offered a chance to get off the pension book in exchange for a lump sum payment and some free land. And that was because after the Napoleonic Wars, they realized just how long these people could live for and how much money they would have to pay out for these people as pensioners. So that's one thing to look at. Take a look at these records. If they've got a service record, you'll find the detail of if they've gone across in that way. And that might be one explanation. But more so, I would say perhaps if they were just farmers, that there's a land of opportunity and there's a good chance for getting some good stuff through when it comes to some cheap, fertile land, large land, and making a go of it and making a good thing. So they may have heard some promise and they may have gone from there. So I think you've got a plausible story already. You've got two possible stories, but one I think is very plausible. And so that will be the first thing I would look for. At this point, you're probably not going to find too much in the way of passenger lists or anything, but take a look anyway. There might be some very early ones. We do have a few early collections of early traveling across the seas, early migrants, but take a look in Canada as well. Canada might be your source for some good information. So as we get towards the end now, as we get to that 5 o'clock, it looks good. And as we can see, as I was saying, we have got up to 28.1 degrees in here. So I'm going to take a drink. It's definitely still getting warmer. And I'm definitely starting to boil. But thank you very much for joining me. And it's been lovely to have you once again. Thank you to Ellie in the comments, and thanks for all of your wonderful questions. I hope that they help you get a little bit further, and I love seeing you all talk to each other as well and answer each other's questions. The Findmypast forum is there for that as well at all times. Go in there and have a great time. Family history always is a great time, and definitely I look forward to seeing you again on Friday, where we'll talk about the week's new releases, maybe tease some upcoming even bigger releases, and we'll share some fun and have a bit more of a light-hearted look at family history and the things that we're getting on, share our successes and stories. So I look forward to hopefully seeing you there. Until then, have a great time, and I will talk to you very, very soon. So thanks for joining. Hopefully, again, if you have any more questions, we'll see you again same time next month. So keep them there, keep them prepared. Or if you think of any questions in the meantime, write them down and then bring them to next session. And if I can't think of the answer, then I'm sure someone else will be able to as well. And definitely look forward to seeing you again, whether it's on Friday or another time. Have a great time. Stay safe, stay well. If the weather's great, enjoy the weather. And if the weather's not, stay inside and do some family history. I'll see you in a bit. And I can't resist. In bocca al lupo. Good luck and see you later.